All right, should be good.
All right, great. I think we're good to go. Good evening, everyone. I'm Eric Berkey. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Barcroft Land Use Analysis working group we have here. So welcome, everybody. Good evening. My co-chair, Daniel Weir, should be joining shortly. So I'm going to start us off with the remarks we always look forward to, which is to orient ourselves to our virtual meeting environment, after which we will discuss the agenda briefly, and then I'm going to throw it to our planning staff for a presentation, followed by folks with Jair Lynch. So again, welcome to tonight's April 22nd, 2024 Barcroft Working Group meeting. This is our fourth meeting. We're going to be talking about urban design tonight, and thank you for participating. We look forward to working with you over the next few months, as we have, to review Jair Lynch's vision for Barcroft in the context of existing county policies and plans. A few logistics to remind everyone of our virtual meeting environment. So everybody is joining us remotely tonight. Tonight's meeting is available to join from the Barcroft Department's Land Use Analysis webpage and the county's events calendar. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for anyone who wishes to use it. If anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect by phone. Please keep your microphone muted until you're called upon. And I would ask if you could keep your camera off as well until called upon. And then when you would like to speak, if you're able to come on camera and identify yourself and your affiliation, that would be appreciated. If you're not a member of the working group, we do ask that you remain on mute with the video off, so the Teams platform can focus on the working group members. Just as an aside, we've really worked hard to make sure that we have time at the end of these meetings for public comment. And so if you would like to engage in public comment, I'll have instructions for that. So we want to make time for folks who are not members of the working group. When a working group member is called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is on the meeting command bar. We don't have the ability to unmute you, and if you're dialing in by phone, you may need to dial *6 to unmute. And then, of course, when you're finished speaking, please remute your microphone. The meeting chat is active for technical assistance only, or if you would like to let us know that you want to provide public comment, simply let us know that you'd like to do so at the end of the meeting. That's all the meeting chat should be used for. It's not used for any discussion, questions, public comment itself, things like that, because all comments must be shared verbally for the record. So again, public comment, I'm going to make time at the end of the meeting, so hopefully no later than 8:50. And depending upon how many folks we have, I will try to give you as much time as possible, but we're going to have to see how it goes. So tonight's conversation, of course, again, is limited to members of the Barcroft Working Group roster. Some of our groups have identified an alternate number. So if there are more than one of you on the call, please just make sure that only one of you is speaking tonight for your group, and the other person, of course, can watch. This is a large group, so obviously just, be mindful of that. We do want to make sure we use our time efficiently and capture as many perspectives in the allotted time as possible, so we can provide this feedback to county staff as well as to Jair Lynch. If you'd like to be recognized to speak on an item, please use the raise your hand function. Make sure your video is on again, and then leave your microphone muted. And I will make sure that everybody who wants to has an opportunity to ask a question or give a comment. There may be some folks who are joining us by only phone today, and if that's the case, I will do my best to make sure that we take pauses to verbally check in to make sure that those folks who are only on the phone have an opportunity to be recognized. Again, all of this is being recorded, will be posted on the county website, and all information associated with tonight's meeting will be subject to, or is subject to, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act requirements. And I believe that is it. So again, tonight we're going to be focusing on urban design. That is the subject before us. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to county staff for their presentation.
Thanks, everybody, and good evening. Olivia and I are going to run through staff's presentation before handing it over to John Lynch. So I'm going to pull up our slide deck. Just give me 1 second. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So we are at our 4th official working group meeting, not counting the kickoff. And we're going to, as Eric just mentioned, focus on urban design. And urban design, just to kind of be very transparent here, we've actually been discussing it almost every single meeting, just under a different theme, if you will. And that's because urban design is so broad of a topic. It lends itself to so many elements of this site, whether it's open space, the location of buildings, the relationship to the areas we want to preserve, the streetscape environment. So it's almost impossible to, I think, capture all of it in one meeting. So as you've seen from month to month, we've tried to isolate the discussion into, I think, more obvious topics. And really, with this last topical meeting that we have, we wanted to really focus on the remaining elements of what we consider urban design that haven't been discussed yet, and that is the building heights and their relationship to the preserved buildings that would remain on the property. So I think once we wrap up tonight's conversation, we would have really kind of had a comprehensive assessment of the site's urban design elements and both how new construction may relate to the preserved areas. So similar to the last couple conversation, we wanted to provide some updates on community engagement beyond this working group, what else is happening and what to look forward to. After our presentation, Jared Lynch is going to cover theirs, which is also available online. And then we'll have a discussion with some clarifying questions, another planning, or I'm sorry, guiding principle, and anything else you might want to get into. On the community engagement side, we do want to return to our graphic that we continue to update as this process moves forward. You can see the highlighted meeting there, tonight's urban design focus. We have one more working group meeting, which is the May 13th date. This is where we plan to come back and help synthesize what we've heard and begin to share both on the county side, our preliminary recommendations on any kind of policy changes that we think are necessary to implement Barcroft's vision, but also on the Gyre Lynch side, what in their proposal has changed based on the feedback they've gotten from both the community stakeholders, but also staff over the last couple of months. So we'll hopefully try to conclude that conversation and beyond mid-May, move into what will kind of be a lead up to the county board consideration in July. So as we get into the second half of May, we should have a better sense of what does that look like, which meetings do we think we want to target, and likely kind of start to preview the order in which we want to return to a lot of the commissions and committees that are actually represented in this group. So a lot of them have stakeholders that are joining us every time we meet, and we want to now have a more specific and guided conversation with each one of those now that we've kind of gotten our heads around what we want to recommend, and also from the applicant side, where the proposal has evolved. The other update I wanted to highlight, you'll see in the middle of the screen, our open house has moved back 1 week, April 27th, as you've seen in, I think, Olivia's email from Friday, actually has a separate event that you may find interesting, but is unrelated to our study. And to help avoid conflicts with that, we wanted to use May 4th as the new date for the open house, which will still be from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we'll send some additional reminders and information and really kind of look to you all in your respective groups to help distribute that message even further. We want to make sure we have the greatest awareness, and folks who maybe are not able to join us Monday nights can then use that opportunity to catch up and still share some feedback that we can implement in this process. So that's the schedule update, and we'll continue to highlight that as we go forward. But as I mentioned, kind of rounding out the urban design conversation, now that we've gotten through the first three, tonight we wanted to kind of touch on the maximum building heights and how they transition to the rest of the property. And we're going to do that by first starting with the policy updates. And in this case, when we look at the full breadth of everything that's been adopted countywide and for Columbia Pike, the two area plans from 2005 and 2012 really going to be the focus of tonight's conversation because they really drill down and have very specific guidance about what should happen on Columbia Pike and particularly in Barcroft. And you really need to understand the relationship between both those plans to get a full picture of what was envisioned, what order did it come in, and then how do we reconcile the two? Because there are elements of those plans that don't really speak well to one another. And we actually have a great opportunity in front of us to help mitigate that and move forward with a more consolidated vision for Barcroft. So starting with the Columbia Pike revitalization plan, this was first adopted in 2002 and again updated in 2005. But this, as it relates to Barcroft, only focused on its northwest corner, so the Fairmont Run and Columbia Pike. The George Mason corner was also identified, but really on the other three sides of the intersection, not so much the Barcroft corner itself. And you can see here, we try to kind of continually give you a context parameter of where this is with respect to the rest of the property. So we're looking at that commercial area on the northwest corner. And I wanted to pause here because it's really important to highlight the timing of this plan. When you look at the different heights that were adopted at the time, the four-story maximum building heights, those were all done before we were able to and adopted the remaining vision for Barcroft, which established much taller building heights. So at this earlier moment, this was the only plan that was in place. And therefore, when we had to consider urban design principles and transitioning from new construction that was possible to preserved areas of the property, immediately across from the zone, you had, two-story buildings that, as far as we knew at the time, would continue to remain. So this is more of a snapshot in time that I think warrants a revisit and updating because of the later plan that happened in 2012. And we want to really make sure that they speak to one another and establish a consistent vision for the property. So that kind of explains the history of why you see much smaller building heights on that northwest corner and suddenly go to 6, 8, 10-story limits for the rest of the site. Timing had everything to do with that. So speaking of that later plan, in 2012, focusing on the residential portions of the corridor, a decision was made to prioritize the preservation of the center core and southern half of Barcroft Apartments while limiting the redevelopment opportunities along its urban edges, Columbia Pike, George Mason, and Fairmont Run. And you can see here, what we tried to do is really kind of help clarify the color-coded map because that legend is very difficult to read. But the numbers that you see on this screen are really a cheat sheet of how high can I go? What is the maximum number of stories that the code currently permits? So in that neighborhoods area plan, what were we thinking when we were trying to very quickly go from new construction and new buildings, and how do they transition to the existing buildings that would remain? So you can see here, through reductions in building heights, how that transition was anticipated, typically going from 8 to 6 to 4, and ultimately to 2. But more importantly, kind of the separation where you have certain zones that act as that transition period. Sometimes we have streets, and other times I think we just have to be more creative about just using architecture and different setbacks to accomplish that. But this was the vision in 2012 that updated, I think, what was possible on the block, but unfortunately did not go back to that commercial corner at Fairmont Run and Columbia Pike to update the heights at that time. So those heights remain at 4 stories. And I think through this process, we can kind of help clarify and update that so that we have a more consistent vision and I think more gradual transitions on the property. So this gives you a sense of the policy context of how we got to where we are. And I think really sets the stage for the proposal updates that you're going to see from Jai Lynch and how they are kind of using this to evolve the vision for Barcroft and still achieve some of the housing goals that were set at the beginning of this effort. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Olivia.
Thanks, Matt. So before we get into the applicant's presentation, we just want to talk through some of the additional, site considerations and other kind of rationale for change that we're going to see in the applicant's presentation. So we go to the next slide. One of the first kind of themes to look at, this has been a theme throughout this process on all the topics, is consideration of the topography challenges on the site. In this graphic here, you can see in the darkest red areas are some of the steepest drop-offs on the site. And then on the Jerry Lynch proposal on the other side, you can kind of see how a lot of the redevelopment areas are proposed where those kind of along the contours of those steepest areas. Again, taking advantage of those lower points on the site where additional height is proposed. So we do want to note that the transition areas between future redevelopment and existing preserved buildings often involve significant changes in this topography, particularly on that western half. And then also want to note that although we'll see maximum building heights on certain portions of the site, due to the topography, those maximum heights may only be realized on certain portions, as some of those will be built into hills and then will include a shorter height as they transition towards the plateau area. The next slide. So the other point that we wanted to note are the two different types of transition areas that we see in the Jerry Lynch proposal. The first one kind of takes advantage of existing or proposed streets and the distance that those introduced streets will provide between both, redevelopment and redevelopment, but also redevelopment over to preserved buildings. These areas will also include street trees and other vegetation that will help soften those transitions. But the other types of transitions we'll need to take a more thoughtful look at are those shown in red on the screen. These areas are much closer to the preserved buildings. They may not benefit from, our proposed street going in. So again, we'll need to carefully look at the transitions between those areas and any other opportunities like existing or proposed tree canopy that can be introduced in those areas to soften that transition. The next slide. So one last kind of thing to point out are the changes between the existing form-based code and what's proposed by Jerry Lynch. So here on the left image, you can see where a former area that was supposed to be in the conservation area was proposed. And then the blue area on the Jerry Lynch proposal that's now proposed to be new development. So again, we'll need to look at these areas where conservation was previously envisioned and look at how those transition towards those preserved buildings. And then also looking at additional adjustments where appropriate at the commercial northwest corner, as that part also doesn't need to transition to lower density buildings any longer. So with that, I think we'll pass it off to the applicant for their presentation. And then once we finish that, we have some discussion questions for the group. And then again, we'll want to save some time at the end to discuss some of the draft planning principles.
Thanks, Olivia. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci, and we represent Jerry Lynch Real Estate Partners. And tonight, I'm joined by David Hildy with Jerry Lynch is online, as well as Chris Gordon with KGD Architecture. He's going to walk you through our proposed revisions in just a moment. But at first, I want to touch on where we are in this overall master finance and development plan process. As Mr. Matuzik noted, we're kind of coming to the completion here of our main topics in these first four meetings. And then next month, we'll be able to present to you all an updated plan that will take into account the feedback that we've heard from you over the past couple months as we've discussed preservation, open space, and transportation, as well as the feedback we'll hear from you tonight. So on to tonight's topic, urban design. If we could go to the next slide. The discussion here tonight is largely going to focus on height, because as we look to locate the density that's necessary to support Gyre Lynch's affordable housing commitment across Barcroft, we have to consider certain elements like the topography across the site, as you've heard, and as Ms. Sontag went over, is various from north to south, east to west. We also have to consider the surrounding context across Columbia Pike, South George Mason, and 4 Mile Run, as well as the context interior to the site, and determining where height and mass is most appropriate. And then also consider the relationship of the new buildings to those existing buildings to remain. So in looking at these design principles and how to meet them, height and massing becomes a key element in urban design and our proposed revisions. Next slide. So we'll start you all here with a concept diagram, as we do in each of these meetings. And just to reorient you all to where we are, north is on plan left. So Columbia Pike here is on the left-hand side of your screen. And then 4 Mile Run will be to the bottom of your screen. And then George Mason Drive there is at the top. And as we've discussed, our design team here, they've created these 3 nodes that weave in the new development and the existing development to remain, with George Mason Place and Wakefield Place kind of anchoring the corners there, with Barcroft Crossing and Amenity Center connecting those 2 nodes in the middle. And you've got 12th Street connecting each of those 3 nodes there, east to west across the site, with Thomas Street in the middle there, acting as your north-south spine, as well as that historic linear greenway that we talked about at the last meeting. Next slide. And then stripping back that concept a little bit, wanted to focus on our proposed development blocks. So you'll note, you'll see them here shaded in blue. They kind of follow those nodes that we just looked at, George Mason Place there on the east side, Wakefield Place there on the west side. And you'll see that these are concentrated around the edges of the site. And this layout is, as Chris Gordon will speak about in more detail in just a moment, is a response to those urban design principles that we just went over. This layout responds to the topography across the site. It's locating height and mass in appropriate areas in and around Barcroft, and it's going to transition these new buildings to the existing buildings to remain. And so with that, I'll hand it off now to Chris Gordon with KGD to walk you through our proposed urban design revisions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to talk. I should point out too that the block sizes were also gone over in the transportation plan, and the emphasis on the newly created Taylor and 12th Road. The first principle, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. So those are defined by some of the new changes to the form-based code mapping and the transportation plan that we have. The first principle, take advantage of the topography in consideration of the appropriate heights. Olivia went over some of this, but just to reiterate it, there's quite a bit of topography. We call this top area, and you can see the X's are designating particular points in the plan, and the numerals afterward, the number afterwards, is the elevation and height above sea level. You can see that it's quite steep, going from George Mason Drive on the upper corner down up to the 193 feet, where the Thomas Street Plateau starts and the entrance to that Thomas Street happens. And then again, it goes quite steeply down again towards Wakefield Place and towards 4 Mile Run. These are really formed by 2 valleys, one for Doctor's Run and one for 4 Mile Run. So the flat area is on the middle portion of it, and these topography lines that you're seeing here are 2-foot increments, but you can see how tightly they are. It gets darker and much more blackish on those perimeters. That's very steep, and so that's one of the reasons why we refer to that top area of Thomas Street as a plateau. So taking advantage of that, from what Lauren has described and what Olivia had also described a little bit, the perimeters in the upper portion towards George Mason Drive is lower, much lower, Same thing going to Wakefield Place on the bottom is also quite low. So the impact of height is lessened for the interior spaces for the conservation areas, but increased, off to the perimeter. Go to the next one. We did keep the graphics in here, so it sort of emphasizes what we were just talking about. Reconciling heights discrepancies between the commercial form-based code and the neighborhoods form-based code. As Matt had discussed, the differences between the two. And we also, again, talking about reconciling this from the transportation plan. If you want to go to the next. And this is a agglomeration of both codes. The red signifies the perimeter of the neighborhoods of the form-based codes, but in particular, the neighborhoods form-based code is the darker lines. Our site is the purplish color. And then the cross-hatched areas are the commercial nodes, the commercial form-based code. Our entire site is pretty much within the neighborhoods form-based code. However, the far eastern portion across George Mason Drive is the Penske site, as it's referred to, is in the commercial nodes. And then the extreme western edge is in the commercial codes. And as we were talking in the transportation, they weren't really reconciled. And I think Matt touched on that too. Next. What that means in the current height recommendations, and we've color coded this so that it's a little easier to understand. You can see the circled area to the page, the bottom on the west. You can see the 4 stories and 3 stories. The 3 stories on the backside, I should point out too, is from the mapping of the BES, and it actually is kind of odd because it sort of requires townhouse type developments or small apartments on that back edge. As you progressed further down south 4 Mile Run, the heights increase. The heights of the buildings across 4 Mile Run are actually 14 stories. So in recognition of that, and I think from the topography too, those heights increased. And then they terrace down to the 6th story. And then the blue signifies a particular passage in the form-based code that requires 30 feet of height directly adjacent to the conservation area in green. And that's within 50 feet of any structure that exists in those. And I'll show you what that means in section. To the east on the top of the page, the recognition of the importance of South George Mason and Columbia Pike, it's 8 stories, 6 stories, and then progressively stepping down. Again, the 4 stories in those conditions there are designated because it's small apartment townhouse designations from the street designations in the form-based code for uses on those faces. Next. Increase heights to achieve density targets in contextual appropriate areas consistent with the county policy. So in this case, we're talking about making sure it responds to those, the topography, to the conservation area, to the adjacent sites around the perimeter, especially. And in this diagram, we're showing, recognizing what heights exist. So the numbers on the sites directly across the street, those signify how many stories those are. And then we've also taken a chance to show the distances that we're talking about between those. So we're not directly adjacent to, in these cases, there's quite a lot of right-of-way that exists between those. So there's a lot of space between them, especially to the page north along one of the blocks actually faces Doctor's Run, which is got quite a good buffer to the neighborhoods to the east or page north. And then we're also suggesting stepping back the buildings at George Mason Drive to create a public open space in those cases. Going to the next. principle, provide appropriate transition and heights to buildings within the conservation area in keeping with the neighborhood's form-based code. So we just went over the perimeter and how we're proposing the relationships between those. And in particular, part 4, you can read it yourself, but neighborhood manners is important in this case. For BES sites and adjacent to conservation areas, there shall be a setback of at least 20 feet from a wall or existing buildings within the conservation area, and B, where any portion of that structure within 50 feet of the wall existing buildings within the conservation area, that portion of the structure shall have a ultimate building height of 30 feet. So what does that mean? The next slide, we show on the left-hand side an example. So within the 50 feet of separation between the 6-story structure and the green, which is the conservation area, if you build within that, you have to stay 20 feet back from it, and you're allowed to only go 30 feet high in those areas. And then a newly constructed, if you just simply don't build that 30-foot zone, you can go straight up to 6 stories adjacent to the conservation, provided you're 50 feet back from that structure. Next. So going to the western node, looking at it, this is a blow up of that area. And the suggested or proposed heights that we're asking for. Again, we're showing the distances to the perimeter and the heights of the buildings along South 4 Mile Run, which is 14 stories. And what we're recommending south of Wakefield, which is in the commercial nodes, and you remember those were 4 and 3 stories. We're proposing to increase that density and increase that height. So we're talking about 8 stories in those locations. And then the further you get away to the edge, it's 10 stories. As you get north of Wakefield, 8 stories along Wakefield to match the heights proposed on the western portion of it. And then the same as the neighborhood's form-based code calls out today, which is 6 stories. And then tapering down to the 30-foot transition area, which is signified in the blue lines. And the green, again, is the conservation area. We're talking about 14 stories along South 4 Mile Run because we see this height as an opportunity to increase the amount of units that would be possible. And it happens to mirror what's going on across to the western edge of that. That right-of-way is quite significant because of the transmission lines that exist there today, and then the dual-purpose roads with South 4 Mile Run plus South 4 Mile Run minor. Next. What does that mean in terms of a graphic depiction of that? This is a section looking to the east, so the intersection, so South 4 Mile Run would be to your back in this particular image. The pink is the future proposed development. The red line, dash line, just to make it clear, that's the 4-story height restriction to exist today in the form-based code. And you can see that on the right-hand side, it's quite open. That's the South 4 Mile Run, which I just described. And then Columbia Pike is pretty significant too in terms of its separation between them. There was one building that had been redeveloped using the form-based code, and that's being depicted in the 4-story building on the far left-hand side. There is a key plan on each of these sections. If you can read those, it's quite small, but you can see exactly it's at the tip of the site. Next. So moving further down 4 Mile Run, this is the 14-story proposed 14-story future development. Again, in the red dash lines, you can see what is allowed today. And depicted on the far left-hand side is the 14-story buildings that exist there. They're twin 14 stories. And this gives you a really good example of how wide that distance is between them. We didn't put the power poles in, but they exist there somewhere in the middle of this. So what we're talking about is an additional 4 stories on the perimeter of the site in the lowest portion of the topography around Barcroft, and this is what it looks like. To continue, the next slide shows a little further to the right-hand side. So again, the proposed building that we just talked about is on the left-hand side, and you can see that the stepping down effect of the line of the current FBC height requirements, and we would abide by that and follow the same trajectory. Sorry, was there a question? The section, and then just to the adjacent right, you can see the green conservation areas in South Thomas Street. Sorry, go back. Just the label for South Thomas Street is actually to the right-hand side of not between the 2 buildings. Sorry, that's in the wrong spot. You can get some idea of the plateau that we've been talking about there too. Next. An aerial view of that massing. This is from the tip again. So off to the left-hand side is Columbia Pike moving up. The 4-story redevelopment building across the street, you can see depicted in white. And then South 4 Mile Run scooting off to the right-hand side, and then the 14-story buildings across the street today as they are. We're not showing the power line again, but this is a view of that of the massing of those sides, starting with the 8-story on the tip, moving back towards the South Thomas Street plateau. It terraces down. Moving further down South 4 Mile Run, you can see the 14-story buildings proposed down on those areas. Next. On the east node, where the intersection of George Mason and Columbia Pike, you can see the relationship at Doctor's Run. We're proposing to maintain the heights similar to what they are today in the form-based code. However, we're extending the 8-story further down George Mason Drive because we think with the topography and the distance from the conservation areas that there's enough distance between those, and there is also a significant amount of topography, as there is with most of the sites. And I think you'll see in the depiction that this helps us negotiate that topography without losing additional floors in those locations. The 6-story along 12th Road and South Thomas Street. And you may notice that we've eliminated the 4-story along the 12th Street area that had been shown on the original, and that's because of the designation there to create a small apartment townhouse. We're proposing not to use that. Next. A section to represent that. So this is looking to the north, or if you look at the key plan, it's looking, page left. The conservation area on the left-hand side in the section. You can see the South Taylor Street right-of-way is approximately 90 feet. And the existing dashed red is the current plan, and this is the proposed. So the 8-story that we were proposing along South George Mason or George Mason Drive, you can see really doesn't affect the conservation view shed, but it does help us negotiate the heights that you see on South Taylor Street down to George Mason Drive. Next. This is a view looking due west, or on the key plan page south, cutting through the corner structure of the corner building. The gray is the proposed parking garage, which is not going to be seen from the street, but that's going to be the garage, since this is a section through the site itself. The red again is depicting the line of heights allowed in the current FBC, And you can see the massing stepping down from Columbia Pike all the way down to 12th Road South. Here, this is an opportunity to see again that Columbia Pike has got quite a lot of distance between the Centro on the right-hand side, the existing development there, and the proposed. Next. An aerial depiction of this massing. This is looking back. Centro is off to the right-hand side, and to the left is a proposed Penske site massing on that site. And then the yellow color is the corner building, our proposed public open space on that edge. And then both the corner building and then the further down building that's across from Doctor's Run, you can see there. The heights are essentially matching on Columbia Pike with the Centro across the street. And the massing, you can see terraces down towards the conservation areas on the interior. Next. So a side-by-side comparison, so you can easily see the changes proposed between the two. We believe that they are subtle, but they improve the plan for a number of reasons stated at the beginning of the presentation on this. But you can see that it's following a lot of the guiding principles that using all the knowledge that we have today to improve the plan for future redevelopment. Let's go to the next. And this is a view just to get sort of a synopsis of what we've been talking about. This is actually a view looking, George Mason is in the foreground, just passing by, and you can see, even in the further foreground is Doctor's Run Park. You get a sense of the topography there with the buildup of this Thomas Street Plateau, and how on both sides, both the east node on the right-hand side and the west node on the left, how the massing tapers down and moves away from the Thomas Street. But you can get some sense of how much topography there is there and how dramatic the change in height is just naturally, just the way the site is now. And I think we've used that topography in an appropriate manner to not only increase some of the height where appropriate to compensate for the topography, but also to provide better opportunities for the future redevelopment without affecting the conservation area. And to that, we ensure, this is our fifth principle, ensure design compatibility between the buildings adjacent to the conservation area and the existing buildings to remain. The current FBC touches on this, of course, but we've gone a little bit further to be a bit more descriptive about goals within that to maintain the architectural compatibility. One, transitioning massing heights to mitigate impacts on adjacent conservation zones. So we've just been talking about all that and representing how we feel that we've met that. Two, provide scaled architectural elements within fenestrations to diminish the massing both vertically and horizontally. And just to break that out a little bit is modulating or creating modules in the building fenestration to diminish scale where appropriate. Building vertical facade changes to identify base, body, and top in the building massing. And then variations in fenestration heights such as parapets and other elements. So not everything's uniform horizontal or uniform vertical, but to vary, create a bunch of enough variations so it breaks down the massing appropriately. Provide number three, provide sympathetic pedestrian street relationships along the base of the building. The streetscape and how people actually interact with buildings is at the sidewalk and how you relate to those buildings. So that's very important that the scale be brought down to that level. And you can see the pictures, the images on the left of the existing do that very effectively. 4, consider appropriate locations for building uses such as amenities, entrances, loading, and trash. It's always important that you diminish the impact of those services on the existing. And then 5, consider landscape buffering between buildings where appropriate. So continuing on with, even with the Garden City movement that this has been, the original Barcroft was a model for, continue on that with landscape elements. Next. And that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's concludes our presentation. We're open for questions.
Great. I think at this point, I'm gonna go back to staff to tee up some of our discussion points here.
Yeah, let me just bring up our slides. A second. As we do that, I did want to mention, actually, we could probably say that for the end of the meeting. Here we go.
I'm not seeing anything, but my computer is running pretty slow. Is it showing up? Okay, there we go.
Did we have Glenn? Hand up?
Yeah, was that Glenn? Is that a clarifying question? Oh, here, well, give me a sec. Give me a second. Hold on. Why don't you hold your question real quick?
Sure.
So we're gonna do. So here's the order. So we'll do clarifying questions, building height maximums. We'll hit transitions, and then other stuff. So I'm looking at my watch. About 7:50. So I'm gonna try to do this about an hour, so we can fit some public comment in at the end. All right, Glenn, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I did have a clarifier, sort of 2 related clarifying questions. One, does the form-based code, I didn't go back and read it again and I don't remember the detail. Does the form-based code define only the number of stories? Is it X number of stories, 14 stories, 12 stories, 8 stories, and not the number of feet? So that an 11-foot floor to floor or a 10-foot floor to floor could create different height buildings inside that 8 or 14 or however many stories?
It does it both. It does it both in stories and in height. In the case of the height, some of the stories, it's almost, you really would not achieve the height maximums in some of the sections of it. And in the case of the 30-foot adjacent to conservation areas, it's kind of an odd height for a building because it's a struggle to get 3 stories. You can in a concrete structure, you might be able to get 3 stories in that, but in wood construction it would be very difficult. So we're showing that as 2, but it does talk about it in two different manners, both stories and which
in small portions, like when it says 14 stories, it is, or 10. I guess the FBC doesn't go above 10, but it is 10 stories or 100 feet or 120 feet or whatever.
It does have a maximum height, yes.
All right. And then second question, more about
just real quick, if I could for a second, the form-based code actually does go as high as 14 stories. Only in key select areas, particularly in the east node, where I think anytime you're surrounded by existing mid-rise buildings, there is a few opportunities. So we have 10, 12, and I believe 14-story limits, but they are very intentional and limited.
Okay. Right. And so that answer actually mitigates my second question. But I'm still kind of curious. Does the development agreement allow for only rental apartments, or is there a possibility that some of these, and I know it's way down the line, 10 years or whatever, but are some of these potentially condos?
I'll recognize David Hildy with Gyre Lynch for that. I think there's opportunity for some portions of the site to be not non-market rate
Yeah, I think
David?
really, as we look at
Yeah.
what's allowable in the form-based code, there may be condos, there may be market rate rentals, there may be other types of housing types that are allowed in the form-based code.
Okay, and the development agreement doesn't require you to do one or the other or anything?
No, it does not.
All right, and the reason I'm asking is a condo floor to floor might be different than an apartment floor to floor, and if there was no limit on it was 14 stories, but not a number of feet, then the building could be potentially, as a condo, I think especially, somewhat higher. But it sounds like there is a maximum height in feet anyhow, so it's all kind of moot. But thank you for clarifying both of those.
Great. I'm going to go next to Daniel Weir, followed by David Howell. Daniel, you can go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, mute attack. I have 2 or 3 clarifying questions. The first one has to do with the 14 stories. Where is the lobby entrance going to be? Are those going to be, is the lobby going to be facing into the Barcroft Apartments complex, or is it going to be facing Formula Run Minor?
Is that to us, Matt?
And I'll say based on slide 18, it looks like the lobby is on floor 1 on 4 Mile Run Minor, because that was the double height the double height story. But I also recognize that just might be, the shorthand, and it's actually intended to face somewhere else.
To answer that, we don't really have a location, but more than likely it's going to be on 4 Mile Run.
Okay.
Because it's closer, it's a better identification and better access.
That raises some real serious concerns that I have that I'll not concerns so much as questions, but I'll come back to them later. Clarifying isn't the time for them. Then am I right that which streets are going to be part of the public grid, again, going to be on the master transportation plan? Is it just Thomas and Taylor and 12th Road, or are the other sort of parking lots that look like connectors that go from street to street, are those going to be on the grid as well? By which I mean the public grid of streets as indicated on the streets map in the master transportation plan.
I think at this stage we can confirm that Wakefield and Thomas will be part of that public network. If Taylor is, it will only be the initial segment between Columbia Pike and 12th Street. And I would imagine by our final meeting on May 13th, we can confirm the status of 12th Street.
I got this.
Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah, we lost you there, Daniel.
Can you hear me again?
Matt, did you say? Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead, Daniel.
All I was saying is, Matt, I heard you say Wakefield and Thomas, and that's as far as then my connection dropped.
Wakefield and Thomas will be public. Taylor is likely to be public, but primarily between Columbia Pike and 12th Street. So that first segment that's being introduced next to new construction. Okay. And I think by our final meeting on May 13th, we should be able to confirm what the outcome will be for 12th Street.
Okay, but the connectors that are more like parking lots, those aren't going to be those aren't intended to be made into public streets. They're intended to continue to be street-like parking lots.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to David Howell, followed by, I think it's Dick Woodruff. Go ahead, David.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I believe it's page 11 of the staff presentation. If you could scroll back, well, maybe we don't need it, but anyway, there's a bullet that talks about the flexibility. Yeah, right there. It's possible that maximum building heights may be realized only for portions. And I guess my question on that is, to get a certain amount of volume that you require or desire, there's both, of course, height and there's also footprint. So I'm wondering whether in some cases there's consideration of maybe one more floor and a smaller footprint where that is important for the topography or important for the open space or important for the clearances between conservation areas and the new construction. Whether that sort of that formula or that dynamic is going to be part of the consideration when you come down to to making the decisions about height, because obviously a lot of people are concerned about too much height, but with the topography you can take some advantages there and perhaps depending on the requirements maybe dial back the footprint a small amount in places where it could matter.
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment. I think what might help in that for this study to really be effective, and I think for everybody involved, staff included, to have a clear sense of what is possible, what is envisioned, what J.R. Lynch, as the applicant in this case, has maybe explored and studied, potentially even ruled out. We really need to see even a high level approximation of building footprints, which we're seeing on the screen now, and they've been kind of identifying throughout once they acquired the property. But as we do that, and I think we see some hypotheticals and at least one way in which the site could be developed, what I think is a healthy reminder is that at least the current process, and even when we get into the neighborhoods form-based code amendments in the second half of the year, we're not really stipulating exactly how the building footprint will be oriented and kind of letting that remain an option to the design team moving forward whenever they are finally ready to move forward with a specific phase. And rather what we're trying to elevate and kind of pin down, if you will, is the orientation of the building. So where's their front, where's their back? Are there zones of transitions where height does need to step down, or zones where buildings should not be located because they're really getting close to existing buildings or perhaps natural areas we want to preserve? So I think specifying some of those parameters, but it really won't be until an actual application is filed and we see later down, especially given the phasing diagram that we've seen already on the site, how the design team will ultimately react to the vision and the guiding principles that we have for the site.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, David. I think Dick Woodruff is next.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not remembering how we got to this building
James,
that's on 12th Street
Can you
South.
drink my drink?
Hey, hold on, I'm going to interrupt you. If folks can remember to mute themselves if they're not speaking, that would be great. Thanks. All right, go ahead, Dick. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad you had this slide up because I'm not remembering this quite large building that jets out into the conservation area that's on the north side of 12th Road South. And can you tell me was that on previous design plans submitted by J.R. Lynch, that particular building? And also the sort of unoccupied space just north of it. What are those two spaces intended to be? That's empty space and that building, what will those be? Will those be apartments, or is that the new designated public facility, or what is that?
So this may be a good time for J.R. Lynch to bring up maybe one of their slides where there's actually a kind of a notch in the outline of the property when you're kind of traversing Columbia Pike. There are two parcels that essentially represent other ownership. They're not part of the Barcroft Apartments, not part of the larger master financing development plan. One of them is an older, I believe, rental community, a small number of units, and the other is a recently completed by right townhouse development. They're both kind of like on this hill, if you will, the peak of Columbia Pike there. So what we're seeing is basically what else beyond those two properties, those two parcels, those Barcroft actually represent, and therefore J.R. Lynch controls, which are then forced to kind of continue to build around those two parcels. So that's that little square green looking notch along Columbia Pike. What's happening around it to the south and east, I think, has been identified for redevelopment as early as fall of 2022, when the first version of the master financing development plan was released. It may have looked slightly different in terms of the orientation of the buildings and where the future public park would be. But I believe as those versions evolved, that historical building that has the arches, I believe number 40, has been identified as one that would go away and be replaced with new construction, which was something that we've kind of seen as part of this big balancing act throughout the property, where in this case, we would be losing an existing building and having new construction replace it. But on the west side of Thomas Street, in that section 1, the more historical, important aspect of the property, we're actually gaining buildings that will be preserved that our previous vision documents actually called for redevelopment. So in some cases, the preservation area increased, and in some cases, it decreased as Lynch has been able to assess and study where development is most feasible and economically sensible.
Thanks. Do you know what the intended use of that building is? The proposed building? Does Lynch have a plan for that? Just because I remember there was a lot of discussion about a public use facility, you know, of recreation. Is that what that is? Do we know?
Are we talking about the small building on the corner of 12th and Thomas, or a different
No, I'm
one?
talking about the new proposed large building on the north side of 12th Road North there, or 12th Road South.
The
Yeah.
E-shaped building that's on its side?
The W-shaped building.
W, you got the right letter. No, I mean, that building, as far as we're considering it, is not necessarily new. I'll let Lynch speak to, I guess, when it was first introduced, but all of these are residential in nature.
Well, I understand all that. I understand the point you were just making. I'm just wondering what the use of the building was going to be, if they know. Can they clarify that?
Beyond just residential, you mean?
Yeah.
David, do you want me to take that? It's a resident.
No,
it's
I'd
going
have
to
to-
be
yeah.
a residential building.
Yeah, it's a residential building. Yeah.
All right, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Michelle Winters.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry for the mute problem before. So my question is about the affordable housing components. I know that a certain percentage of the affordable units are going to be in new development. And so I'm wondering what the thinking is so far on where among all these new building options those affordable buildings might be, and also how the height options that you're seeing here are going to interplay with the affordable housing locations or any other affordable housing considerations.
Yeah, Michelle. You know, in our overall plan, you were looking at 3 to 4 new construction buildings, and we want to put at least at least one in each node. So some buildings are smaller footprints. It's going to depend on the LIHTC applications and things like that. But we're trying to create enough flexibility in these footprints to allow us to again do 3 to 4 and at least one in each node to make sure it's represented in each area.
So the footprints that we're seeing here are potentially the actual footprint of an entire building, or are these still way too stylized for that?
Yeah, these are just yield studies. So as I think Matt said, as we go through each project, there'll be a use permit process where we'll get into those details.
Okay. And then the question on the heights and affordable housing, I know that, again, looking at the finances of the MFDP, the amount of new development that you can get, which depends on the heights, is one of the things that can improve feasibility of doing affordable housing because of the profit potential of additional new development. So is the proposal that you have here sort of exactly what you were thinking when you did the MFDP, or has it changed at all since the MFDP? And how much does all that depend on getting the 14 stories?
Yeah, jumping again. This is our kind of base development plan that supports the overall financial plan.
Okay, so base meaning there may be other proposals at some other time. That's what usually base means, that there are options beyond the base. And actually that was the title of one of your pages in the report.
I'm happy to jump in here too again, but I don't know if Melissa, you wanted to address it all.
Sure. I can just note that the financing plan that was included, that was acted upon by the county board in December 2023, was those commitments, like the 10%, at least 10% of units up to 30% AMI, and some of the other commitments were based on Jared Lynch's proposal. We did base those commitments on Jared Lynch's proposal in there. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers it. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get, I guess I'll ask a more straightforward question. Are there, if I can even be more straightforward, are there additional changes that could help bring more affordable housing, either more total units or more 30% AMI units, beyond what you're doing right now? Because one of the things that we talked about when things were building up to the financial approval back last year was, oh, well, when we look next year at the planning process, that's when there's going to be another opportunity to address these things again.
Sure, but I think this is where I need David to chime back in about, if any of those changes, for example, extra height would change anything. I think that, well, I don't want to answer for you, David, if you could come back on and kind of explain how you came to the heights you came to and how that affects the affordability.
Sure. Yeah, this plan takes into account the full picture of our financial plan here. I think what we're talking about too is over time, if there are additional opportunities. I mean, today, going and building a really tall tower, right, doesn't economically generate any economic value for the property. But I think again, this is the partnership we have with the county and Amazon, that as we progress here, if there are opportunities, that is something we're working constantly with the county, and we'll again be going through these. So at this time, this is the plan that makes sense and does fit with our financial plan.
I'll also add just some additional context is that there are, I think, some limits to the point where additional density solves, I think, some of the housing challenges that we see here. And I think that this entire MFDP is asked to solve for. The more obvious one is, of course, the taller you go, the more you have to park. Parking is a critical element to how the existing residents are able to, still call this home. And they've expressed that priority consistently, I think, since we got started. So making sure that there are opportunities where we can still maintain that 1-to-1 ratio and deliver new construction that meets our minimum standards. That becomes a challenging aspect on such a topographically challenging site when you have to deliver so much structured parking. I will also say that the more I think we eat into the property to identify additional development areas. You know, height is only going to get us so far, but I think the other elements that start to get even more challenging are the other priorities that we have in terms of tree canopy, natural areas, and of course, making sure that access and circulation are still addressed when those new and old portions of the site have to now kind of work with each other moving forward. So it's a lot of push and pull, but it does seem like we're kind of maximizing the development potential at this point. But to David's point, until applications are filed, we'll know exactly how those might look.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go with Mike Hanna, and then I want to transition us to, I almost said transitions, but I think actually the next thing is building heights. So go ahead, Mike. Oh, Mike, you're muted. You're going to need to unmute.
Sorry about that. The area to the west of Wakefield Street, the 3-building cluster, now that I've seen kind of the height of those things, those interior roadways there, are they, at this point, I know they're not going to be public because we just talked about that in terms of being part of the grid, but are those intended basically just as service roads, or will there be enough room in there for, I think, both ped and bike access through there? Or are those seen as more service roads for, getting to the back to loading docks and that kind of thing?
Are you talking about the gaps between those towers?
Yeah, you have that three building kind of thing.
So you're seeing on the left-hand side the red lines and the amount of topography that coincides with those locations. And it's, quite dense, and you can see how steep that is. Connections there are going to be very difficult. So we're envisioning right now gaps between the building that would primarily be for servicing those buildings, trash loading and access there. Where possible, we'd like to get at least some pedestrian movement between the buildings and those locations to go up to Thomas or come down to 4 Mile Run. We just haven't gotten into enough detail to look at those. More than likely, they will not be accessible because of the steep topography that exists there today, but it may be possible in one or two of those locations, or in both of those locations, to get a pedestrian connection between the two sides, I should say.
All right, great. I do have one clarifying question before we move on. Going back to Michelle Winters' question about the affordable housing, I think this is for Melissa Danowski. Does so the neighborhoods form-based code has affordability requirements? Does the preservation of the legacy units, does that in of itself would that satisfy the neighborhoods form-based code requirements, or would Gyre Lynch be required to produce more like any other neighborhoods form-based code project? Can you explain?
Sure. So for neighborhood form-based code projects that are new construction, they need to provide 20 to 30% of the net new units being constructed as affordable for 30 years, up to 60% AMI. And however, they have the option to provide those units in the existing buildings. And those buildings do have, as you know, the 99 years of affordability, up to 60% AMI, in many cases deeper. So they do have that option to meet that requirement through the existing units.
Great. Thanks for clarifying. I see Dick's hand still up, but I think it might have been up from before. So I think we're going to transition, Matt, now. We'll transition to talking about building heights. And then after that, we'll do transitions. I'm going to put myself first, take chair's discretion. I do building height maximums. This is sort of building height maximum adjacent, but I want to return back to the question. I don't remember if it was Glenn or if it was Dick Woodruff raised about the new proposed building at 12th Street and Taylor. And so I understand that throughway, where there is not currently you go there and there is a courtyard and then there is an archway. And so Taylor kind of stops for a block and then it kind of continues on the other side. up the Columbia Pike for a block. And so I understand there's a need for loading and kind of a connectivity point there. I just wonder, this is maybe more of a statement than a question. So I walked the site with Daniel Weir last night and one of the Barcroft residents, and it is a really nice, awesome courtyard. It was being used by a bunch of kids were playing soccer in it. And it's just a really nice kind of community space. And we were walking around, I'm thinking like, this is Barcroft right here. And so it's, I understand everything that's been said about why we need density there instead. We've got to make some tough choices. I don't disagree with that, but it just really is unfortunate that that's such an awesome space as it is, an open space. And so, if there's any way, this is really for the Gyre Lynch folks, if there's any way to think about that open space there, even if it gets reoriented, thinking about the design of those new buildings on 12th Street. One of my biggest concerns with this redevelopment is just making sure that the new buildings aren't like the new buildings over here and then the old buildings over here. And we sort of have like folks who live in the new buildings and they have their space, and folks who live in the older buildings and they have their space. Like, I think that would be a pretty unfortunate, outcome after all this really hard work and all the hard work you all have done to make this, project stick. And so I would love to see you all consider maybe opening up those buildings somehow, or kind of maybe better integrating them than just kind of the square kind of donut shape that we commonly see. So you don't have to respond to that, but that's sort of my feedback after walking the site. I'd like to see us kind of work on that a little bit more. So it's not a question. If you want to respond, feel free, but that's more of my feedback after having looked at that space. I'm going to go to Glenn, followed by Daniel Weir.
Okay, well, that's the same building that I'm interested in, right? I think that's, to my mind, to my expectation, that's the one that feels the most intrusive into the conservation area. And I would just reinforce, at 6 stories, I think it would overwhelm the building on the south side of 12th. I would like to at least consider 2 variations on that one, either the kind of the 2, and I get that this is a number of apartments and there's a pro forma and all of that, but we're very early on too. This is not a huge change, and I'm sure that no one's counted exactly the number of apartments you have. You're doing this by square footage now, so I think there's some flexibility there, at least I hope so. So my 2 variations on this are, one, the 2 legs of the E or the W, whichever way you want to look at it, to the west, pull those back and make some sort of little figural space there, right? A space that people use. And I think that's what Eric was sort of talking about there. And I think that would be great. It's, it's behind those townhouses. So maybe that would be a nice place where the community could really feel it's central. And it is pretty central to that. And that could be a nice space. Or secondly, 6 stories feels really tall to me. It's 4 stories I'd feel a lot better about, or if it's 6 stories, that there would be a setback at the 4-story level of some import, so that the building begins to mass back a little bit and you don't read that 6th story from the street. Something like that, I think, because that guy is sort of sticking straight. If you kind of read a figure ground of this, that guy is right in the middle, and all the figures and of the smaller scale, these older apartments are very thin, and there's a big guy that sort of sticks his finger out into the middle of the space there. So I really feel like that's the most worrisome piece that there is. So that's all.
Thanks. Thanks, Glenn. Daniel, actually, I'm going to make sure we don't have anybody is there anybody on the phone that I've neglected to call on? I'll give a pause here to make sure anybody who's calling in only by the phone feature has an opportunity, assuming you're a member of the working group. Okay, hearing no one, I'll go with Daniel Weir, followed by Michelle Winters. And then Dick, if you still want to go, you got your hand up, you can go ahead. Daniel, you're on mute.
Thanks, Eric. I certainly share the concerns for everyone else's benefit. I mean, Eric and I basically had a bit of a mild heart attack as we realized that, you know, at a minimum, if the arches aren't, you know, if that arch feature isn't preserved, we need to probably update the cover of the neighborhood's form-based code, because that structure is featured on it, right? I understand that it wasn't featured because that structure, you know, because of anything particular to that structure. I understand that, and I want to make sure we all understand that too, is that the reason that that structure isn't featured on the cover of the neighborhoods plan, it's not because the people who were developing the neighborhoods plan wanted that structure to be preserved in and of itself. And I've talked, I have over the last, you know, 72 hours talked with a good number of the people who were on that working group and confirmed that. But you know, it is one of the few things that makes the area, in the words of a county board member that I've spoken with, not look like a barracks, right? So like there is value to it, and I share my co-chair's concern about the fact that there was that it was lively and being used, right? And I really, if there's no way to preserve it, and that may well be the case, I think the onus is really on Gyre Lynch to make sure that there's a phasing plan for when things are torn down and built, to make sure that there is a similar space that can be used by people in the way that it's being used, that's set up and existing before that one is torn down and another building is put on it. I don't think I need the applicant to speak to that specifically this evening, because we have meetings coming up, but I would just ask that be taken under advisement for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Winters, please.
Yeah, so piggybacking on all of these comments, something that was discussed in one of the previous meetings that might interact with this was the open space. And right now, on the east side, that corner of George Mason and 12th, between 12th and Columbia Pike, you have this sort of wedge of a public space that to some people looked like just a slightly larger setback. And so ever since I saw that, I've been wondering, you know, why that location? Why is that the place where you want a public space? And I think they answered a little bit, but if I were doing this design, and I'm not a designer, I would pull that space and put it in the middle, kind of like in the area where everybody's been talking about currently has, you know, that big open space. Of course, the arrangement's going to be different, depends on whether you put Taylor Street through. But to me, public spaces for places where you want to hang out, I think I would rather be hanging out on the inside of that block rather than out on a more major George Mason Drive. But that's just me. So I just wanted to bring that public space into the same conversation.
Great. Daniel, you still have your hand up. Is that another comment?
I put it back up because I have a separate comment on heights of buildings and wanted to get back in line before going in that different direction.
Well, go ahead. No one else has their hand up, so go ahead.
So the 14-story buildings, two related comments on that. One, I think there are only a few places in all of Northern Virginia where the skyline looks nice. And what Eric and I learned is that one of them is in Barcroft Apartments, looking straight between the Carlisle and the Berkeley, those two tall apartments on 4 Mile Run Minor. So I don't. This is another one where I just want to ask the applicant to take it under advisement and make a note of, and if there's something to do to come back to it with it at a future meeting. But it would sure be nice if between all of the different tall structures that are built on that are built along 4 Mile Run Drive, if there's a way to preserve one of the very few view sheds that the Skyline development still looks very nice under, that would be nice to do that. More importantly, if the lobbies are going to be facing 4 Mile Run Drive Minor for those 14-story buildings, then I think that we need to really return to the transportation and streetscape discussions, not necessarily tonight, but I don't know. I have deep suspicions about whether or not 4 Mile Run Drive would be able to handle the car volume that would be generated by those buildings being along 14th Street. And I have similar deep suspicions that the parking lot streets that are not part of the street grid would be able to handle them if they are being loaded from inside the complex. Likewise, the pedestrian experience for people coming in and out of the lobby along 4 Mile Run Drive Minor and hopefully walking up to Columbia Pike is presently abysmal. I am a big user of the 16Y, and I see that intersection walking from 9th Street down Buchanan to 4 Mile Run Drive Minor every day on foot, I don't know how street improvements to 4 Mile Run Drive Minor don't become part of this project if the lobby is going to be facing 4 Mile Run Drive Minor. I don't necessarily mean don't become part of this project for updates to the neighborhoods plan, but they would absolutely have to be dealt with comprehensively at some stage, site plan or whatever. Not site plan, but use permit. So those are my heights of buildings comments. I'm going to yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I'm going to go actually to Chris Slatt, and then I'm going to transition us to transitions. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey there. I just wanted to kind of echo what Commissioner Weir just said. I am fine with the general height shown in this plan, but it does make me want to take another deeper look at 4 Mile Run Minor from a transportation infrastructure standpoint and really think about what that experience is for somebody trying to walk or bike. Because it sounds like we're potentially putting a fair number of people there on 4 Mile Run, and they gotta, get to transit or get up to the commercial areas up on Columbia Pike. That's it.
Great. So I'm going to move us along here. So now questions on transitions, and then I think we're going to kind of wrap up and talk about some of the urban design principles. So if folks have questions about transitions. Actually, I had my hand up, so I'll go ahead first real quick. This is not like strictly, I don't know if it's strictly a transition issue, but it is an issue. One of the things that really struck us in all three of us, but especially our representative from the Barcroft Residents Council was just the lack of lighting throughout the site. And so this is a question for Jair Lynch. I know that you folks are doing a lot of work on renovations that's starting soon. That's not what this working group is about, but it certainly does affect the entire site. And that just really struck us how dark a lot of the site was. There are lights for sure on some buildings. There are some existing lights, some Dominion lights as well. But are there any plans to evaluate kind of the lighting situation, especially in the areas that are not going to see redevelopment?
Yeah, Eric, I'll jump in there. Absolutely.
Thanks,
one of our due diligence item was doing a lighting study, and you're absolutely correct. There are gaps in our maps that we see, and as we go through the renovations, we'll be addressing those.
Much appreciated. I think just getting a lot more light in what is a pretty leafy area, which is fantastic. I think really could help alleviate a lot of concerns that we've heard from residents about, potential crime, just general safety, generally feeling comfortable, in their own neighborhood. So I appreciate that. I'm going to go to David Howell next.
And thanks, Eric. On that point, just to follow up on your point, that I would hope for the sake of all the residents and the most effective type of lighting would be to follow the International Dark Sky Standards, which is, I think it's part of the green building incentive, but some of you may know about it, that it has to do with the temperature of light and the direction of light and the negative impacts of the wrong kind of light in the wrong places for kids, for lots of people, for wildlife, that kind of thing, and in fact also for safety and security, because glare is a big negative with improper lighting. But I want actually on the transitions theme, I wanted to come back to a different angle on the. Could you go back to slide 11 again? That was a good one. Get a double whammy on this. The issue of the landslide area. And I don't know how it was that a hillside, very steep hillside with a lot of fairly large trees all of a sudden just came apart. And we don't have to go back to figure it out. I don't know. It's not relevant to how it ended up happening in terms of stormwater and other things that might have set it off. But now what there is such a, and I've also walked this, that it's such a steep hill that there are going to be real serious issues with containing it. And I understand from a discussion with the urban forestry staff that, you know, the engineering challenges for such a steep hill really would preclude the ability to plant any canopy trees or any large trees. They would have to be understory trees with very small root volumes, just because of the need to compact that soil so much that it ends up becoming difficult to plant things more than other than just like shrubs and grasses. So I think, you know, in the spirit of trying to make lemonade out of lemons, I'm just wondering whether, and so this is just for, if you look at Thomas Street coming through, this is the little hook that comes around near the bottom, comes around behind that one building there. Yeah, it's extremely steep, maybe 40 feet, a very steep angle. Would it make sense to consider just investing in doing something rather than spend all the money to try to shore that up? Just take that out and drive some piles in there and build a small parking garage that kind of hooks around the bottom of that, holds the whole soil back, just like you would do in any major construction where you've got you know, a 4-level garage or something, and you've got to hold the soil back, and take advantage of it for a good purpose, where the top level would be at grade with the plateau, and the bottom level would be at grade down by the lower apartments, maybe having access from either the top or the bottom. I think it could be maybe four levels. I don't know the exact dimensions. And then one of the things that the site really struggles with is to have both large areas of sunshine and large areas that's flat. And so on the top of the parking garage, you could make a park. It could be urban gardening. It could be pickleball. You could even put a small swimming pool up there, whatever you want. It could be an area for residents to use for the kinds of activities that you know, may be a little bit short on the site because of the topography and the conservation. So just a thought to take a look at that as an option. I think that obviously it would probably cost more than just digging out and putting in a lot of concrete terraces. But then if you do that, what do you have? Just a heavily sloping hillside with small plants. Doesn't do much for anybody. So I don't know. It's just an idea that parking is such a important thing, and maybe that would help help supply the need. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Glenn McCullough is next.
Thank you. Can you go to slide of the J.R. Lynch, slide 25? I just had 2 quick comments about the transitions. By the way, I represent the BSCL. I think we were supposed to say that early on, but I didn't ever mention. 25. Oh, wow. My 25 is different than your 25. Something I looked at yesterday. Let's go. I'm looking for, yeah, that one, 24 now. Okay. So I just want to say, I mean, this is by way of the good news. I think by happenstance, mostly, the taller buildings are either relatively north or relatively west of the conservation zone, the smallest buildings, the lowest buildings, and therefore have a little less impact on the amount of sun that these areas will get throughout the day. So I think that's a happenstance of the configuration of the property. But I think that is good news, is that mostly from the south during the day, it's still going to be relatively bright no matter how tall these buildings are. Now, if you can go to, I just wanted to point that out, but if you go to 19, or 19 on mine, probably 18, the bad news, not really bad news, but what I would like to see more of, get to 18. Yeah, this one. So this one, you know, the transition from the small conservation area to the big buildings is substantial there. And what I, you know, of course, and I know it's early and you probably will do this, but I'd really like to see sun studies, right? Let's see what the sun on December 22nd is and June 22nd. June 22nd is going to be fine. It's probably not even going to touch because it's so high, but December 22nd might be blocking a substantial amount of this. So there's a new transition. I mean, there's a new height that impinges slightly on the old line, plus the 4 stories on 4 Mile Run. So I'd just like to see, you know, a little more strategy about where the sun is on September, on the equinox and the solstices. And again, I'm sure this will happen down the line, but that will be important to kind of understand how much light is really getting in there during different seasons. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next up is Alice Hogan.
Good evening. I'm Alice Hogan. I'm with Navajo Arlington Housing Alliance. I have a few questions. I think, David, you had mentioned that there will be 3 or 4 new construction buildings, one in each of the nodes. Were you saying that those 3 would be affordable buildings? So that was my first question. And then I was hoping you or someone could follow up on Michelle's question about the open space at such a busy intersection. I had the same reaction, and I wondered why it's being chosen down there away from where most people will be living. And also, if it is going to stay there, would there be some sort of good barrier that would make families feel comfortable utilizing that space so close to a busy intersection? And then I had one more, but maybe I'll see about those. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. The first question, yes, as part of our commitment of 1,335 affordable housing units, in the areas of new development, whatever we demolish, we need to replace. So right now it's a little over 400. So that's why I say 3 or 4 buildings would replace those 400 units that we are replacing into new buildings. So that's the program we're trying to fit, and that's why I say there's flexibility to figure out how we fit that program, but at least have representation across the site. And then, yeah, I think the open space meeting we had last and your comments today, that is something we are taking back and reviewing.
Sounds great. Thank you. The final thing was just maybe following up on what Eric was saying a little bit about the archway and the open space that up at the top, and just wondering about looking at the very basic renderings that we're seeing today. Obviously, this isn't what the buildings will look like, but they look so blocky and so tall. I'm just really wondering about materials, colors, any kind of arches to kind of match up with what is there and what will have been gone from there when you're thinking about the buildings, most particularly ones that sort of closest to the preservation area, building areas? Thank you.
I can start on that one. It's a great question. And I think we all feel a sense of frustration in that we can't all at once get to that level of detail. And I think go a step further to, I think, solidify maybe expectations for how those future buildings might relate to the existing structures. The challenge, though, is in this first analysis, the first half of the year, we are by design limiting ourselves to really what did the adopted policies call for and what level of detail did they get into when first prescribing the vision for Barcroft. And that initial step, which will allow us to get into the greater level of detail, is to first figure out, okay, where do the streets need to go? Generally, what is the configuration of the public parks? How high can the buildings be? And once we have at least some parameters like that in place, it not only allows us to then get into the specific location of building edges, the character of some of the guidelines that we want to institute for the relationship they may have with the existing buildings, but it also gives Giant Lynch, I think, an opportunity to keep testing their modeling based on how many units they think they can achieve. So I think if folks can be a little bit patient, we're going to solve a few things by July of this year, and then in the second half of the year, we're really going to dig a little deeper and get into the form-based code elements, which do specify a little bit more and get into a little bit more detail about what we can anticipate. But I will say there is a final layer of information that we simply won't get into until an actual proposal, like a special exception use permit, is filed, where building by building, we're going to see how Giant Lynch's design team has taken all this information in, and particularly in the areas that are adjacent to, so abutting those historic preservation boundaries, those actually will not only have our typical review process, we're interdepartmental staff team, the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group, but also the Historical and Landmark Review Board are involved to make sure that the architectural treatment and the massing transitions are appropriate in all those locations. So it is kind of a three-tiered approach, but I think gradually we'll get to that level of detail and have multiple opportunities for feedback.
Great. I'm going to go to Daniel Weir next, and then I think we want to move towards the design principles. Ahead,
I have
Daniel.
a more wrap-up-y comment if you're ready to do that, but I'll defer if you want to do anything else first.
Yeah, well, I think that's
Eric,
sort of
Eric,
where we're heading.
Eric, this is
I think you got
Linda
Linda
Dye.
on, so let me defer to Linda
I've been
first.
waiting for quite a while.
Yeah, Linda, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. My question and comment builds on a previous one. Slide 16 showing the new 14-story building on the east side of Wakefield next to the proposed open green space, and the winter shadow that would be cast pretty significantly from a 14-story building from the south to the north. And if there's a way to, I certainly understand having 14-story buildings on 4 Mile Run. If there's a way to step back the one 14-story building so that it does not create a serious shadow on the deliberately designed open space on Wakefield Street there. Similar comment for slide 21, same concern, but to a lesser degree because it's now an 8-story building casting a shadow north during the winter onto that open space. So just wanted to put those comments out there that certainly a 14-story building will cast quite a shadow to the north. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And on that note, is there anyone else on the phone that I have neglected to call upon? We'll take a pause here. All right, we'll go back to Daniel Weir.
To also revisit this issue is I understand that it's very likely going to be the case that there is not a practical way. I can think of a few other reasons why that haven't been raised to move forward with maintaining that archway. It would be nice if there was a way to do that. I would ask the applicant to come prepared, if not at the open house, but at the, but later, with something akin to what was done with the Bob Peck Chevy site, where we are using the architecture to memorialize those features that are unique to Barcroft as it exists today, that won't be continued, that won't necessarily continue to exist. That's assuming that there's a consensus, or even something close to it among downstream participants, that that it's an acceptable change. I don't mean by saying that I think that there won't be. I just mean that I think it would be, I think that there are going to be voices that are going to be heard from at the commissions that are much more concerned about the preservation of that archway than what we've heard tonight. So my suggestion to the applicant and request is that we have some options for ways that we can honor the spirit of that, of that structure, and ensure that the active space that it currently facilitates is preserved in the staging and phasing. Thanks.
I will just add briefly, one of the things, and it's not a direct response or solution to what was just mentioned. I want to stay away from that. But on the broader topic of historic preservation objectives, as they relate to the reality that portions of this site will be lost for redevelopment, we are working with our historic preservation staff to help memorialize language that I think moving forward, as those applications come in for new buildings, building by building, we have some documented language that speaks to mitigation strategies that we've utilized throughout the county every time a site like this and lesser sites had to be redeveloped to achieve other purposes, whether that's signage, whether that's interpretation, or oral history. I mean, there's a very broad menu of things that can be identified. Design considerations that you just mentioned, could they be interpreted somewhere else in the property through architecture? So we'll be working on that, and there'll be some additional materials to review that I think, beyond this current process, I think help us document what we would like to see, moving forward.
Great. Go back to Dick, and then I think we're going to do kind of wrap up and final comments. Go ahead, Dick. Dick Woodruff, you've got your hand raised if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Yeah, I thought I had lost you. Just to put a finer point on it, that building that we're talking about, and the staff has made this well known, and the HLRB, I think, has made it well known that that's probably the most distinctive historically built, most in the entire complex, really, because it has so many unique features. And, it's really, I think it's such a shame that building, of all the buildings in the complex, is designated to be torn down and replaced. And if there was a way that we could somehow protect that, or as Daniel was suggesting, protect a piece of it, that would go such a long way toward mitigating, I think, the large buildings that are intruding on the conservation area on all sides. And I really think, and I'll just reiterate, I think what Daniel said, that I hope the applicant comes back, or Jerry Lynch comes back with some plan to perhaps reduce the size of the new building, or reorient it or something, because it really, it'd be a real shame to lose it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I put myself next, and then if folks want to raise their hand, if they have final comments, and then I want to give an opportunity to staff as well as the applicant as well. So I put myself next. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't express my appreciation for the work here. This session is not the wrap-up session, but in a lot of ways it sort of is, because we're hitting on a lot of the things that kind of came up previously. And as Daniel mentioned, for me, doing another walkthrough just kind of crystallized a lot of this in my head. And so I would encourage folks to do that as well if you're not as familiar with the site, or if you haven't kind of, taken a walk. So, I, of course, share a lot of those sentiments that folks have expressed, but I also appreciate kind of the realities of what we need to do here in order to make this deal stick, in order to preserve affordability. And so I would concur with Daniel Weir's recommendation of seeing if there's a way that we can at least retain some of the architectural features and kind of the feeling of that space. If we can replicate it through some redesign, that would be very welcome. So that's my feedback. And I will acknowledge that, the fly in the ointment, in my opinion, here is the fact that Gyre Lynch does not have control of that parcel that is kind of immediately adjacent, that is northwest of this building we're talking about. And it was never part of the Barcroft site, but I know that staff, Melissa Datsky, is very aware of that particular site and problems that sites like that have when you're trying to do projects like this. And staff has looked at that in the form-based code for a while here. So it's a problem that I think that the county's been aware of could be a problem. And I think there's just only so much we can do, right? And so ideally, this would be a consolidated site, but unfortunately it's not. Townhouses got built in the last couple of years, and so we have to work around it. And so that's what I'm personally struggling with. But I would like to see a redesign to see that maybe we can at least recapture some of those elements by capture those elements, but obviously have the access that is needed in order to, serve those new buildings that are going to be in that area. So if any other folks have wrap-up comments, feel free to raise your hand now, because otherwise I'm going to turn to the Gyre Lynch team. Dick, I think that hand is from before. I'm going to assume it is. So folks from the Gyre Lynch team, Chris, David, any final comments you'd like to provide? Lauren Riley, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Berkey. Just wanted to say thank you to the working group and everyone who gave us some comments tonight. We're going to take all of these back in consideration as we finalize the overall master finance and development plan. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll be back to you next month with those updates. So we look forward to discussing those with you at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Matt and Olivia, Melissa, I don't know if you folks have concluding remarks.
Not necessarily concluding remarks, but I did want to just, before we close out, touch on the planning principles again. And Matt, do you mind going back to slide 19? I think that has all 4 of the principles there. So just to reiterate, topic by topic, we've been introducing these draft planning principles to help identify some of the core community values and kind of interpret some of the intentions in these, existing or these modified county policies that we're taking a look at. So as you can see in the bottom here, we've added this most recent urban design principle. So what we're asking is that once we get to the May 13th meeting, we would like to finalize these principles. They'll be, packaged in some way with the master financing development plan that goes to the county board to, again, help inform kind of the stakeholder group feedback and anything else that's not quite captured in the policy changes. So as you can review them, give us feedback, feel free to send us an email if you have thoughts on how these principles have been captured. I know Daniel and Eric had some feedback for us the other day, so happy to pass it back over to you, Eric and Daniel, if you have any other thoughts as we close out this meeting.
Yeah, and sorry, kind of went out of order there. I would have put this up on the agenda. We just kind of ran out of time here. But thanks, Olivia. Before I say anything else, I want to make sure there's nobody on the phone who would like to provide public comment who is not a member of the working group? Going once, going twice, and I didn't see anybody in the chat. I'm gonna take a look again. Okay, so we're not gonna do public comment because nobody said they wanted to do public comment. Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me, you know, to conclude here, walking the site and, you know, and talking my conversations with several Barcroft residents is just that these are great planning principles. And I think you guys have done a great job here. The feedback I shared is not only to think about transitions and think about, you know, respecting nature, respecting our green space, respecting, you know, the existing buildings and their history, but, you know, respecting the people that live there. And so those open spaces and that livability, and that's why I was sort of being a pain about the courtyard, you know, that we're losing here. You know, those are places where people are actively kind of enjoying the space and living. And it sounds like that's something that's going to be taken into consideration. And I think that's wonderful. I think that ultimately this is about people, right? And people's kind of livability here. And so thinking about the way that we can kind of integrate these public spaces in a way that kind of respects their current experience and then that of the residents that are to come, right? I think is just got to be a guiding principle in any of the stuff that we do. I don't know, Daniel, if you had any final thoughts before we go.
I think that sums it up really well. And thank you for summing it up so nicely.
Okay, so it's 8:58. You all getting out of here 2 minutes ahead of time. So thank you so much. So our next and final meeting will be on May 13th. Daniel Weir will be chairing that one. Don't forget about the open house as well. I believe that's May 4th, Olivia. I think I got that date right. So please attend both, but definitely attend the meeting that we have on the 13th, and then stay tuned for the developments from our staff after that. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff and applicants.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.